right, well, let's get started. I see we have a really good response here. So thank you everybody so much for joining us tonight at our District 16 Town Hall. I'm Sara Love. I am your state senator, and I am happy to be here with my colleagues, Delegate Marc Korman, Delegate Sara Wolek, and Delegate Teresa Woorman. I'm going to kick us off with a brief overview of some headline topics the General Assembly addressed in our 2025 session, then a couple of topics that my committee addressed, and then I'll hand it over to the others in turn. I know many of you have heard me say that one of the many things that is so great about the way we are in District 16 is that we all serve on different committees. So tonight you'll get a set of different views on the different committees, different bills that we addressed. So for example, I'm on the Judicial Proceeding Committee. Marc chairs the Environment and Transportation Committee, Sara is on Appropriations, and Teresa is on Health and Government Operations. So you really get representation and experience across the range of issues that the Maryland General Assembly addresses. So we finished our 90-day legislative session on April 7th. Each session has its own personality, and this one was a session dominated by the budget. I'm sure most of you read that, if not all of you read about that. We had to address not only our projected shortfall, but also the impact of the Trump administration's actions. We had a revenue write-down mid-session, and so we had to find an extra, Sara will correct me if I'm wrong, $380, I think, million. So we are constitutionally required to pass a balanced budget. It's the one thing that we have to do as legislators. If we don't do anything else, that's what we've got to do. And through thoughtful deliberation and really good and hard work between the Senate, the House, and the governor's office, we passed a balanced budget. We did it through a combination of reduced spending, some cuts, and some revenue generation. And I know that Delegate Wolek will go into that more, and I'm sure Delegate Korman will have something to add on that. But while the budget really dominated the headlines, we also passed a lot of important important legislation relating to energy, relating to protecting Maryland residents from the current federal administration. We passed legislation on the environment, criminal legal reform, protecting our immigrant community, transportation, housing, healthcare, education, and on and on. So like I said, I'll just touch on a couple of these and then turn it over to my colleagues to touch on their topic areas. So starting off, protecting Maryland residents from the Trump administration. So as most of you know, approximately 7% of our workforce is directly employed by the federal government, with another 5 to 7% working as contractors. Plus, we have thousands operating at organizations that are federal grant recipients. Bethesda alone has 7 federal installations, including NIH in District 16, NOAA, and on and on. So as we all know, thousands of Marylanders have lost their jobs, with thousands more affected by the federal government pulling funding. So we spent a lot of time this session looking at ways to support our federal workers. We passed legislation that created a financial assistance program for laid off workers. We created an expedited process for hiring those workers into state government roles. We created an expedited licensing program for fired federal health workers who've been licensed in other states so we can bring their expertise into our state. We created a joint Senate-House committee to monitor what's going on the federal level and how those actions are affecting our state so we can act quickly. We allocated money in the budget for the Attorney General to continue to sue the federal administration when they are overstepping legal bounds. And we will continue to keep an eye on the federal administration just to make sure that we can provide that buffer for our residents insofar as we can. We also addressed energy. We went into this session with the goal of lowering energy bills and promoting reliability and predictability of our electric grid. We passed a couple of bills which increase energy storage. They alter how multi-year rate plans by utilities can be undertaken as another check on rate hikes. You all, I'm sure, have seen in your bills how your rates have gone up, and we are trying to do our job and be a check on that. Let's see, we made solar siting easier and more consistent. And then you all will see a rebate of approximately, I would say, $40 twice a year this year to ratepayers at peak energy time in the summer and the winter to try to give some relief from the higher bills. My committee also tackled immigration. About 17% of Maryland's population is immigrants. Given this administration's focus on immigrants, we wanted to protect our residents as best we can. So we passed legislation that prevents ICE from going into non-public areas of sensitive locations such as schools, hospitals, religious institutions, and others, for preventing them from going into those private areas without warrants. We also enhanced what is called the U visa program, where individuals who help law enforcement in criminal investigations can stay within the country. We extended some time periods with that and made it easier for those folks who are working with law enforcement to stay in the country. I'll just touch on a couple more issues in my committee, and then I will turn it over to Delegate Korman. A number of you reached out to me about the Second Look Act. We passed that legislation. That bill allows incarcerated individuals to petition to have their sentences reviewed, not necessarily changed, but reviewed for the possibility of it being changed. If they've served at least 20 years in prison, they committed a crime when they were between 18 and 25, and they were not sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. They were not convicted as a sex offender, and they were not convicted for killing a law enforcement agent. We also passed, after several years of trying, geriatric and medical parole, requiring the parole commission to look at the age and medical condition, along, of course, with safety risks when considering parole. We also passed bills on the use of AI in deepfakes. We passed legislation that I sponsored, cross-filed by Chair Korman, creating guardrails around data collected by the myriad of cameras we have in the state. We added organized retail theft as a new crime. We protected children from having to testify against their abusers in certain circumstances. We passed legislation on expungement and a whole host of other things. I know there's a lot more that I could tell you about but at this point, I am going to turn it over to my friend and my colleague, Delegate Korman. What to say about Delegate Korman? Those of you who know him know he is incredibly responsive and incredibly thoughtful about constituent service as well as the work that he does. But one thing that continually impresses me about him is his ability to take a very thorny issue and bring it to a successful conclusion. And many of you wrote to us about BEPS, the Building Energy Performance Standard. And Chair Korman threaded that needle. And I don't know how he did it, but he did, representing you all and balancing our environmental goals and coming to a really good piece of legislation where we are moving forward on our environmental goals, but you all don't have to double pay and abide by two different sets of rules. So with that, Chair Korman also reminded me that I just dove right in and I didn't set the ground rules. So I'll let everyone say their piece and then I'll come back and talk about how we're going to answer Q&A. So Chair Korman.
Great. Thank you, Senator. We'll let the people on this call will judge whether or not I actually threaded the needle on the building energy performance standards, but definitely an important topic for a lot of the buildings in our district, and really appreciate having Senator Love over now being Senator Love and no longer being Delegate Love, although we miss her in the House. We're really lucky. She's on the Judicial Proceedings Committee. There's a long line of District 16 leadership on that committee, from Brian Frost to Susan Lee to Ariana Kelly. And what's great about Sara is, in addition to having her ACLU lawyer background and knowing those sets of issues, there's actually a ton of overlap with the committee I chair and that Sara used to serve on, Environment and Transportation, and the Judicial Proceedings Committee, because we only have 4 committees that covers a lot more than what you think of as a judiciary issue. And so she does a great job over there, and it gives us a great opportunity to collaborate on things like privacy standards for automated enforcement. So it's great to be with you all. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I was just thinking, when we do this in the fall, and this year we were lucky enough to do it in person, it's all about sort of the great hopes we have and the great opportunity before us and all the great things we can accomplish. And then we come before you in the spring and you get to hold us accountable to see how we actually did with all that ambition. And I have to say, I think, we navigated fairly well in what are just undoubtedly tough conditions. And I'll talk about 3 of those tough conditions. And I don't want to be too duplicative of Senator Love, and then Delegate Wolek and Delegate Woorman will touch on a lot of these as well. But clearly one of the tough conditions was the budget, as Delegate Wolek will get into in a lot more detail. When we sort of convened, we were looking at about a $3.5 billion projected deficit. We have to balance our budget every year, very different than what goes on in Capitol Hill. And that was before Trump took office. Obviously, things have only been exacerbated by that. I will say a small chunk of that was expecting some problems from Trump. We had an earlier write-down that was projecting some reduction in revenue, but it's just a huge challenge. And the governor came in with what I think is a pretty tough budget, including cuts to Developmental Disabilities Administration and some pretty significant tax increases, including things that I think would have disproportionately affected our district, like lowering the estate tax exemption, so basically raising the estate tax, retail delivery fee, and a few other things. And I think we worked pretty hard to come up with a balanced approach to try to maintain critical services, again, developmental disabilities, but also healthcare, public safety, and education. Those are the 3 biggest components of our budget, while also making some targeted cuts. We certainly were not able to sort of save everything everybody cares about. And yeah, we had to make some difficult decisions on the tax and fee revenue side. But again, we tried to do it in balance. We didn't we didn't raise the estate tax. We didn't do the retail delivery fee. The governor proposed removing itemization of tax returns entirely, of income tax returns entirely. We were able to avoid doing that. So I think we, thread a needle there, to steal Senator Love's phraseology. I'll just say that I think, clearly our problems have been exacerbated by what's going on in Washington. I mean, however you voted in the last presidential election, I have a feeling I know how most of you voted, but however you voted, what Trump is doing has a really disproportionate negative impact on Maryland. So part of our way out of this is going to be to grow and prosper in a private sector economy. Yes, we're always going to be a company town, and that company is the federal government, but we need other economic opportunities. My small contribution to that was legislation related to how we do franchising in the state of Maryland. Those companies that have a concept and then they basically sell that concept to other small business owners. We are trying to streamline the franchising process in Maryland. We passed the bill out of the House unanimously. Unfortunately, it didn't proceed in the Senate, but I'm really happy that the office that deals with franchising in the state of Maryland is still going to pilot some of what was in that bill because they thought it had some value. And so hopefully that's going to help us on the private sector side of our economy, even as we fight what's happening in Washington on the public side of our economy. And speaking of that, obviously tough condition number 2 is what's going on in Washington with Donald Trump. I don't want to repeat, Senator Love again. Unfortunately for Senator Love and I, we've been here before. We were here the last time Donald Trump was in power, and so we put a lot of tools in the toolbox then, including most significantly empowering our Attorney General to file suits against the federal government, a power that has been used quite liberally over the past 130 days or so. And this year we added staff for the Attorney General and expanded that power slightly to make sure he was representing our interest in court. But we've been able to do some other things this year as well. We brought back a healthcare protection commission that we had done previously to make sure we were protecting as much of the sort of Maryland-based Obamacare as possible. We locked in some environmental rules related to coal ash disposal, just one of numerous environmental rules that are being rolled back by the administration, but one we actually have the power in Maryland to do something about ourselves. Many of those rules, only the federal government can do because of interstate commerce, but this is one where we were able to replicate it. We tried to do something similar with housing discrimination. We did pass that through the House. Unfortunately, it didn't pass through the Senate through no fault of Senator Love's to try to make sure we weren't watering down housing discrimination protections. And we passed legislation related to access to abortion and a public grant for that, for those procedures. So I think, we tried to do a lot there. And then personally, for me, my sort of antidote to the hate that we see from this administration is expanding the anti-bias training we have in our public school systems to cover the school board members. Oddly enough, we had a little bit of a loophole in our law where our school board members were not subject to that. Unfortunately, I can't enroll the president into that program or his cabinet, but at least we can make sure that our local leaders are aware of anti-Semitism and racism and Islamophobia and these other issues. And in addition, we passed a bill I sponsored related to conflicts of interest, which seems very quaint when we have a president taking $400 million planes. But this was legislation to make sure that some things that have actually happened in Maryland in the past don't repeat themselves, where we had a governor who unfortunately had some cases of either self or family dealing that were not appropriate. And then another difficult condition we're facing, obviously these are all related, is what's going on with our environment and our transportation. And there's just been a lot of pulling back of resources from the federal government, which is just a huge challenge for us to do the kinds of things we want to do when it comes to rebuilding our infrastructure or ensuring we meet our ambitious climate goals. So we did try to do some things to make sure we could do our part. As Senator Love mentioned, we passed legislation related to the building energy performance standards. This is a way to reduce climate emissions from the building sector, which is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the transportation sector. But we wanted to do it in a way where we didn't have buildings in Montgomery County that were subject to two different laws, which is what the status quo was. We had buildings that were subject to the county law and the state law. They had some allowances granted to them by the county law. Without these changes, though, they still would have been subject to the state law, which would have been pretty counterproductive. So we were able to make that change and keep our environmental goals in place, but make them sort of a little bit more manageable for Montgomery County. Similarly, on transportation, we're losing a lot of resources, unfortunately, from the federal government, but we did step up as a state to make sure we have money to invest in roads, bridges, transit. Some of those things are tough decisions. It's not, fun to make things more expensive for people, but it is sort of a societal good. And I know, a lot of people in District 16 understand that we all have to sort of pitch in if we want to have the kind of society and infrastructure that we want to have. So obviously a lot more to talk about on all of those topics, but I know my colleagues have a lot to get to. So I'll just say that there's no question that we are in a really challenging time. And, again, what's happening in Washington disproportionately impacts us. But, I sort of believe the old adage, a corner tiger is the most dangerous. So, I feel good that Maryland, with our educated workforce and civic-minded people, are going to be able to work our way through this and come back stronger, but it's definitely a challenging time. So it's good to be with friends as we're talking about those challenges. Let me now turn it over to Delegate Wolek. I'm really excited that Delegate Wolek serves on the committee I served on for 9 years, the Appropriations Committee. She even serves on the subcommittee I originally served on, Education and Economic Development. She does a great job there. And I think this year in particular, she was really crucial in trying to make sure that we brought that balanced approach to the overall budget situation. As I said up top, we did a little bit of everything to make the numbers work, and Delegate Wolek was a chief proponent of that strategy to make sure we weren't cutting too much, also not taxing too much, but going with the Goldilocks strategy of getting it just right. So with that, let me hand it over to Delegate Wolek.
Thank you, Chair Korman. Appreciate the kind words and also note of optimism at the end about the state of affairs. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see all of you, so many familiar faces. I also wanted to recognize the Board of Education member, Julie Yang, who represents this district, who has joined us, among other leaders. So there's a lot to discuss, both in terms of the overall task that we had within the Appropriations Committee, and then also some of my own legislative agenda, and I'll try to cover both of those. And then, of course, we'll get to questions and things that are on your mind. Go ahead and put questions in the chat as well as they come up. So starting off with the budget, before I sort of dive into the numbers and sort of where things landed, I just want to paint a quick picture about the process. So as many of you already know on this call, but to the benefit of those who don't, the process begins really in the summer, where the agencies, the executive agencies, are working with the governor's office, putting together their proposed budget, right? And they work on it and they engage with the executive and with the Department of Budget and Management, put together a proposed budget, which then lands in the General Assembly when we arrive. It's usually a stack of yay high, and we receive it in the Appropriations Committee, but other members get it as well. And that really kicks off the process on our end, because it's important for us to see where the governor has decided to put his support and where he believes there should be cuts. And the reason I bring that up and just want to paint the process here is because that really sets up the conversation that we begin with. This time around, the two pieces that really stood out in terms of where the governor sort of weighed in that was in disagreement largely with the General Assembly was one related to DDA, the Disabilities Administration, and two related to the blueprint. There were cuts proposed to both of those that were not, shall I say, well received by the body. And ultimately, we were able to preserve about 181 million in fiscal year 2025 and 2026 for community services for the developmentally disabled that undid some of the cost containment measures proposed by the governor. We were also able to restore about fully fund the blueprint of formula, with direct aid to local school systems increasing an estimated $594 million, or about 7.3%. So those two big areas we were able to push back and restore funding. Having said that, being part of the Appropriations Committee, the cuts were felt throughout. And I think one of the things that we were trying to balance was that no one area took a huge cut. And so everyone, I felt as though, had a little bit of a haircut. I will say the higher education university system of Maryland took about 155 million cut, which is substantive. And some of that is now rippling through as they're trying to translate that cut into how they're going to be managing their institutions. Overall, we cut about $2 billion, which included $1.6 billion in spending cuts and about 298 million reduction in special funds and another 200 million reduction in planned future spending. So looking in the out years. What all of that ended up shaking out to be is that we have about 2.4 billion in cash reserves to protect against some of the federal actions that we are taking. We were also able to invest about 139 million into the private sector economy, about 100 million for climate pollution reduction, funding for public safety that included 60 million for victim services and about 5.5 million in community-based services for juveniles. So that gives a little bit of a flavor of the process, what we were able to address, and so forth. Of course, cuts weren't the only piece of the pie, right? How we sort of solved this puzzle here. The other part of the puzzle were taxes, and that unfortunately none of us actually serve on the Ways. None of us serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and so some of this is happens, the work on taxes and revenues obviously happens there, but I want to share with you a little bit of what that looked like. So we ended up increasing revenue overall by about 1.2 billion, which included a 3% sales tax on data and IT services, a 2% capital gain surcharge on capital gains in excess of $350,000. We ended up repealing the sales tax exemption on vending machine sales, limited the definition of a historic vehicle to those older than 1999 as opposed to 20 years. We established a new tire fee of $5. We established a new excise tax rate of 3.5% for short-term vehicle rentals. There was also an increase in taxes for sports wagering, for cannabis, an excise, a maximum fee for VIP was also increased. And then in the governor's budget, he had added different tax brackets, one for households making more than 500,000 and another tax bracket for households making over $1 million. And so the House ended up retaining those as well. I have mentioned in my newsletter that, I am not a huge fan of tax increases. And so I was engaged in conversations trying to figure out what that balance was, where we address the state's needs without necessarily hurting our economic development, as well as keeping in mind the fact that many of our residents will soon be losing their jobs. So that hopefully provides a little bit of an overview on what we were able to cut and what we raised. In terms of my own legislation, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, and so I may have to circle back on that. I'm getting a nod from Senator Love, so let's put a pin in that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Delegate Woorman, the newest member of our team, who has very ably stepped into the House and Government Operations Committee. She'll tell you all about her work there. I can tell you she also sits very close to me on the floor, just a couple of seats down. And so it's just wonderful to have her positive energy on the floor. And I'm sure you'll love to hear from her. So with that, Delegate Woorman.
Thank you so much, Delegate Wolek. Really appreciate your kind words. Hi, everybody. I'm Delegate Teresa Woorman, and it's truly, truly a privilege to be here with you tonight to reflect on my first legislative session as your delegate in the General Assembly. Let's be honest, this session was hard. And it wasn't just hard because I'm new to being a legislator. It was hard for everyone. It may be my first year being a delegate, but I've spent 7 sessions in Annapolis as a legislative staffer working for different Montgomery County legislators. And I can say without hesitation, this was the toughest session I've seen. We walked in, facing a tight budget, structural deficits, uncertainty, and worse at the federal level, and just enormous need just across the state. So for me, for all of us, it meant making a lot of difficult choices, but it also meant that a lot of really good bills that had all types of support and momentum, just didn't make it over the finish line. In a year like that, really every vote mattered, every amendment, every hour of committee work that we were able to squeeze in, and all the coalitions that we, built counted. But in all the urgency, I didn't lose sight of who I was here to represent or why this work matters. I can assure you that your emails did run through my mind and desk right before I took those hard votes. This session, I was able to introduce 7 bills. Each one was rooted in a real problem brought to me by constituents, community advocates, or just people trying to navigate a system that wasn't working for them. For all of them, I'll talk about a few of them, but for all of them, it was mostly about fairness, dignity, and making government actually serve people. The bill that I'm the most proud of is my baby, HB 1069, which banned what are called discretionary clauses in life and health insurance policies. These clauses, most of you guys are probably lawyers, I'm not, but these clauses let insurance companies interpret their own contracts however they want, and they can deny your claims without any real recourse. the way that I explained it to my colleagues, I was trying to get co-sponsors around. It's that an Eagles are in a Commanders game where the Eagles get to write the rules and decide if the refs make the right call. Of course, it's going to go in their favor, and that's what my bill fixed. The bill passed both chambers, and a few weeks ago, Governor Moore signed it into law, so that was very exciting. Some of the other legislation that I got to work on this session that just didn't pass. My other baby, HB 1420, which was inspired by a tragedy at the Q Bridge, and the widow of one of the workers who died. She couldn't serve as a representative for her husband's estate because she wasn't a U.S. and she isn't a U.S. citizen. Our surrounding states don't have the citizenship requirement. The widow came and testified at the House hearing and brought one of the House's most conservative members to tears, and she actually voted in favor of the bill, and we passed the bill in the House with bipartisan support. But like a lot of good bills, it just stalled over in the Senate in the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I'm bringing it back next year because this bill for me is about fairness for non-citizens, and our district has a lot of them. Another bill that I am looking forward to bringing back in some sort of fashion next year. Senator Love touched a little bit about the rise of non-consensual sharing of intimate images. The key provisions of the bill that I had sponsored did eventually get signed into law as part of a broader legislation, but some of my provisions would have made it so that companies have to take down these sensitive images quicker than they do right now. So I'm bringing this bill back next session. And another bill that I really close to my heart was 1409, which would have given families the right to install cameras in nursing home rooms with consent so that they can monitor their loved one's care. Sometimes video evidence can be the difference between peace of mind and unanswered questions when accidents happen. As my colleagues mentioned, I serve in the Health and Government Operations Committee, and specifically on the Public Health and Minority Health Disparities and Health Occupations and Long-Term Care Subcommittees. Those are a mouthful. So I saw the question about long-term care. I don't know if we'll get to it, but I would love to chat offline about that. That's one of the things that I've been working on since I was a legislative staffer. So it was interesting to see the lack of progress that we've made since I started working on the issue and where we are now. Since I sit on the Health and Government Operations Committee, I'm just going to touch on a few pieces of legislation that we worked on to protect people that the federal government has failed to protect folks. HB 930 was a great bill by my sweet mate, Delegate Leslie Lopez, which reinvests unused abortion insurance premium into a public grant program, and it expands access to care. It's a great bill, and it's great that she was able to pass it and to see all the behind the scenes work on it. Another one of the bills that we worked on establishes a Health Insurance Coverage Protection Commission, which will help us assess and respond to the federal rollbacks of the ACA, Medicaid, and mental health services at the federal level. Another bill that we worked on that you guys might have heard something about, it's the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. We want to set upper payment limits on the commercial market. So passing this, it's a major step in lowering the cost of prescription drugs. It's a few drugs that they tackle at a time, but I'm sure that the commission is going to do some good work on this. And I'll just wrap up really quickly. We're in that time between sessions, so I'm back home in the district full time. And really, as I mentioned earlier, most of my legislation comes from talking to you guys. So if there's anything that you guys want to chat about, happy to, chat about any potential legislation that you might want to explore or any ideas that you think of. My contact information is in the chat. And I do want to just say that, this role is personal for me, not just because I live here, but because a lot of the lived experiences that Marylanders are still navigating are ones that I'm still navigating. I know what it's like to be shut out of the systems that I need, and I know how tough it is to work hard and still worry how I'm going to pay that mortgage, because living in this district is expensive. And I bring that into every room with me. So thank you for being here. Thank you for holding us accountable and for caring about all this.
Great. Well, now you can see how lucky we all are to have such truly good people, thoughtful people, caring people in Annapolis. So a lot of you have already been putting your questions in the chat. Thank you for that. And anybody who has any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be going through and pulling them out. Delegate Korman and I have been trying to answer some that we can, but we'll go through and talk about them a little bit more. So keep putting them in the chat. Let's start with, there was a question early on about legislation to allow cooperative high-rise condominium and cooperative corporation communities to remove or evict residents who commit certain types of criminal acts, particularly when committed in the high-rise. Chair Korman, you want to touch on that?
Sure. So the Environment and Transportation Committee also covers housing, and including co-ops, condos, and homeowners associations. So I've learned quite a bit about this in the past 2 years. And as I wrote in the chat, I think Alan from the Promenade has reached out to me about this before, and happy to sort of see if there's an appropriate way to do this. Obviously, if you are a renter and you commit an illegal act, you can be evicted. So there's clearly sort of precedent for it. Obviously, if you own your unit, you probably need a little more protection around that to make sure it's not being abused and someone's not just being booted out because they play their music too loud or because their neighbors don't like them. But yeah, definitely, Alan, happy to connect with you to talk about how we can look at something like this, probably for all 3 types of common ownership communities, if appropriate. So happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. The next question actually is something that we've been getting a lot, and it has to do with the bill that has come to be known as SB1 from last year relating to retail electric energy suppliers. Some of you may use Clean Choice. I know there are other providers out there that sent letters saying, oh, because of what the General Assembly did, we can no longer provide you affordable clean energy. So I want to just sort of lay the groundwork first. What SB1 did is it said if you want to sell energy in our state, you have to follow some guidelines. You have to have some rules. Because what was happening is, yes, there were some scrupulous actors, but there were also unscrupulous actors who would advertise a really low rate, get you locked in, and then increase the rates. And others were saying they were providing clean energy when they weren't. So a number of providers have said, we're not going to do it anymore, which to me tells me that they were on the unscrupulous side. I do see that on the Pepco website, there are no other providers listed. I think that we have some other options that we can get to you. If you have any further questions on this, I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more about it. And Chair Korman, I know at our last town hall meeting, you had some thoughts on that one as well. And then also Delegate Wolek and Delegate Woorman, if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 more points. One, I mean, I do think now that we didn't repeal the law this year, we might see some retail players sort of come back into the market and operate under the new rules. I think a lot of them were hoping that we were just going to repeal the law. That did not happen. The other thing I just want to mention is that Montgomery County is shifting to a different model, actually. So if you don't use a retail provider, you're on standard offer service, which is what Pepco goes out to purchase. A few years ago, we passed a piece of legislation from our colleague, Delegate Charkoudian, to allow Montgomery County to actually change its standard offer service. And so Montgomery County is going to be shifting to a greener sort of solar or wind standard offer service provider. So that will be the default service in Montgomery County. So regardless of what happens with the retail market, for those of you who are interested in it for the environmental benefits, Montgomery County will be shifting to that on a broader basis going forward here. That is still moving through the regulatory process with the Public Service Commission, but that's where the county is heading.
So Carol mentioned that Governor Moore vetoed 23 bills, and I'll kick it out to my colleagues. Are there any of these bills that you are most concerned about, and will there be an effort to overturn any of these vetoes? Delegate Wolek, you may have something to say about that.
I might. So one of those 23 bills, unfortunately, was one of my bills in partnership with Senator Love. If you were following along with my newsletters, you may recall that I had a bill that required or tasked, I should say, the University of Maryland Medical School with creating a consumer product guide for parents and teachers on the technology and social media products that are most commonly being used by children. Believe it or not, there's no such thing, no such consumer product guide that is readily available and accessible anywhere, period, as far as the research that we've done. That bill was vetoed. The fiscal note on that bill was in the grander scheme of things. I know I was earlier in my presentation talking about billions of dollars and millions of dollars. The fiscal note on this bill was simply $100,000, and the payoff in my mind was huge. All that to say is I'm obviously disappointed that it didn't, get the governor's signature, and I'm working to regroup and figure out a path forward on it. The good thing was, you always love to look at the silver lining, is that it did pass the House 137-1 and the Senate 46-0. So it has really, really broad support. I think there's been so much conversation around children and their well-being. You all know that I care very, very deeply about that issue. And phones simply aren't the only thing that kids interact with, though I know that has been the topic, right, that we've been delving into as a society, but kids are engaging with that and so much more. And so we need to do better. We need to figure out which products we need to open up, because there are good ones out there, which ones we maybe need to pull back on. My sense is this bill got caught up in the veto letter, which I read reluctantly. Basically said that it's a study, and studies there are too many studies, but this is not a study, and I think it just got wrapped up into sort of this big pullback on studies by the governor. And I will try to make it clear that this is a consumer product guide with a completely different intention. I have gone on longer than I intended. As you can tell, I'm still fired up about this. I will turn it over to Marc as well, because he has something to say on the Renew Act.
Yeah, I just want to take a step back. For those of you who don't follow this stuff closely, most of the news was about the governor vetoing a study related to reparations from slavery. Obviously a really important issue, but that was just one of the bills that he vetoed. He vetoed a number of other bills, like 20-something bills, obviously including Delegate Wolek's, but many others. The process for veto overrides is we don't do like a veto session in Annapolis the way they do in some state legislatures. Richmond, if you read the Washington Post, every year Richmond has a veto override session. We don't do that. So for us, the next opportunity to take up any veto overrides is when the legislature reconvenes. That could be in a special session. That could also be not till next January. And so that's the time to take these up. So I think we have a long time until we sort of need to make decisions, and the sort of, people need to count the votes and figure out how people feel about overriding, the vetoes. One bill, as Delegate Wolek just tipped off, that, I'm a little concerned about the governor vetoing, is what used to be called the Renew Act, which was legislation to basically have the state comptroller and some others study the economic impacts of climate change to the state of Maryland, which are significant because of some of the infrastructure challenges they create. Just in our area, the increase in ferocity of storms has had an impact on a lot of the state highway administration infrastructure, the drainage infrastructure, and so a lot of the flooding we see even in our area, where we're not really that close to a significant coastline, not Kennesaw and Potomac, is indirectly related to climate change. And so, I think that's a bill, whether it's a veto override or some other revisiting of it, that's a bill, that's a policy that I think we're going to see more of. And I think that's true of a number of the other bills that the governor vetoed, obviously, including Delegate Wolek's important bill to make sure our children are using technology appropriately.
What, if anything, can the General Assembly do to encourage construction of housing that is affordable for people in their mid-30s to early 50s so that they can afford to own or rent suitable housing in this county or in this state or near where they work?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the housing is in the Environment and Transportation Committee. Last year was sort of known as the housing session. The governor had 3 pieces of legislation related to housing, all of which passed in some form. This year, it was a much, I would say, quieter session on housing. The governor did have a bill that didn't make it all the way through the process. We did some smaller things. For example, there's a study going forward on whether buildings actually need 2 staircases. That is put in for fire safety, but there may be other ways to build buildings so that you don't need dual staircases and can build them much cheaper, so that housing can be built, still safely but more affordably. I worked on a piece of legislation with our county related to affordable housing, so that's not really for working people in their 30s and 40s and so forth. This is really for people who are economically disadvantaged, but making sure that some of our programs in the county could not only go to new construction, which is very useful, but also to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. If you think about in our area along Bradley Boulevard or along Battery near downtown Bethesda, we have a lot of 40, 50-year-old buildings there. The options for those buildings at this point are to be torn down and turned into luxury or to be preserved in some way. If they're going to be preserved in some way, this kind of affordable housing program can help make that actually work. And so that will maintain the naturally occurring affordable housing we have and not lead to a situation where we don't have those sort of housing options for people. I will say, though, that the tradition in Maryland, which I think is still holding pretty strong, is that a lot of these sort of questions are still dealt with at the local level. Where things can be built, how tall, how far back, some of the sort of zoning questions, that's still mostly dealt with at the local level. We've done a little bit of it at the state level, but in Maryland, I would say we saw that pretty clearly this year with the response to the governor's most recent housing bill. That's still the tradition in Maryland, is that a lot of this be done at the county and local levels that have the land use authority. And I wrote in the chat, but I'll just also add out loud, the comptroller did a state of the economy report about 2 years ago in Maryland, and since then has been doing sort of breakout reports based on that large report. And one of those reports coming soon is going to be on the cost of housing, and so there might be some good tidbits in there that could inform future discussions either at the state level or at the local level where a lot of these decisions are.
And I'll also just add to that this past session, I did have a bill on housing data transparency. I know some of you on the call actually supported that bill by doing a sign-on letter and so forth. And that bill really helped to gather the data in the largest jurisdictions. So the largest counties that have, which are about 6, that have 150,000 residents or more, are required to share their housing data with regard to the type of housing. For example, if it's a triplex or duplex or single family, that's really important as you try to sort of get a lay of the land of what our housing stock really looks like. It's very difficult to make housing policy or incentivize action, to get people to construct for homes for the 30 to 40 to 50-year-olds and onwards, if we don't have the information actually to base any of that on. And I had previewed this bill for those of you who attended the town hall, and I was very pleased when it was passed, also with the support of Chair Korman, because it was in his committee. The bill, in addition, also requires, or actually makes it possible for municipalities to voluntarily report their housing data as well. My hope is that once we have that information, that we can make really educated and thoughtful decisions around housing, because it's so critical to our economy.
Right. What were the main reasons for Maryland's large unexpected budget deficit? At some point, I read it was because a large state government agency or two had significantly underestimated their costs. If that was the main reason for the state deficit, what actions have been taken to ensure more realistic budgeting at the agency level?
I'll take a first stab at that. So there's, One of the reasons is that our economy has been stagnant, right? So our revenues haven't been growing as our neighboring states have been. The most recent data looks like that story may be changing. And so that's a positive news, but prior to COVID and then in COVID, some of those issues were masked because we did get a ton of money from the federal government. Of course, some of this predates me, but my understanding is that some of these, the fact that our economy is seriously reliant on the federal government for both the private sector contractors that work with the federal government or are directly employed, and me being a former Fed employee. So that has, been part of the issue. But then we have had, a real need for resources as well when it comes to our healthcare costs in our state. And so between sort of a stagnant economy and growing obligations, it put us in a challenging situation in terms of where our budget was. And then obviously on top of that, there were some budgeting issues that a few agencies had, and they sort of estimated how much money they had, and then that meant that we had to revise the understanding of what was available. So my understanding is that the executive, the Department of Budget and Management are doing better and taking a look at how they're doing their projections. But so those two issues with our obligations as well as our economy really are the reasons as to why we've had that deficit. But I'll turn it over to Chair Korman if he has anything else to add to that.
No, I mean, I think that was a great summary. I think 3 programs in particular just basically became oversubscribed. Medicaid, developmental disabilities, and our childcare subsidy to help people pay for childcare. Now, I'm a liberal Democrat, so I think government supporting those programs is a good thing. And so I don't want to just say that we should cap all those things or cut all those things, because I think those are actually 3 really important programs. But, because we have to balance our budget every year, we're providing probably a little too much opportunity for people to access those services, and have need to make some tough choices to figure out how to draw some lines to make sure that we're not oversubscribing the state. And one example of that is, now the childcare subsidy program is capped. There's not additional childcare scholarships being made available. On the developmental disabilities, as we mentioned, a lot of those cuts were restored, but I was emailing with a constituent over the weekend about a particular aspect of what we did have to cut that will still adversely affect them. So these are really difficult choices, and I have really not heard from very many constituents who wanted us to do one particular tax or take one particular cut. And so we've just tried to sort of find the right balance and find the best way to, both deal with our, economic needs and our need to not overtax and overburden our citizens, but also provide support for all these really important programs that many of our citizens also rely on.
Next question. Can you address the bill giving the state the power to override zoning / conservation / protected areas for solar farms? It failed to protect tier 1 soils, the soil and terrain that anyone will tell you is critical to protecting food supply, water quality, and our rapidly degrading quality soil. I'll jump in on that, Diana, and let others talk about it as well. One of the things that we have had a problem with statewide as we try to pursue our clean energy goals is the mishmash of local regulations that are coming up. We've had this problem with solar, we've had it with wind, where a lot of lawsuits or a lot of locals saying, oh, you can't build that here. So the goal of this piece of legislation, it wasn't in my committee, so I don't know all the ins and outs about it, but the goal was to set a statewide standard so that we can move forward on our clean energy goals. Anybody else want to add to that?
But we wouldn't put it on the headwaters of our drinking water. And so putting it on our very
Diane, we're
best
actually going to
soil.
ask that folks not do that. I'm happy to talk with you offline. So thanks.
I mean, I'll just add, like, obviously, even responding to you in the chat, Diane, I was a little nervous because you know a lot more about this than most of the people on Earth. The way to try to accommodate the concern you raised is we did put a limit in there about the amount of priority preservation areas that could be developed with solar. But it's definitely, we're sort of looking at competing values here, and both are important, right? We want to preserve and protect land for all the environmental and public health reasons that you're citing. And also, I think many of us on this call want to see us generate more renewable electricity, also for environmental reasons and also for economic reasons. And so it's a difficult balance. I visited Caroline County over the last interim, and they have a cap there about how much solar can be built. And unfortunately, we need to do something about situations like that where counties were just saying no, as Senator Love was explaining. And so this was the sort of balance that we came to. Not to say there won't be modifications in future years, especially if we're seeing the types of solar development that would really start to have an impact on some of those environmental and public health factors that you mentioned.
Thank you. There was a question to me about an anti-SLAPP bill that has not been able to proceed in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. And the question says, given the heightened attacks on the press and the current national climate, state level protections are so important. And I wish Maryland was more in line with other states that have strong press protections. I'd also love to see sponsorship from D16 in the Senate and the House. I addressed this briefly in the chat, but I'll also just mention it here for everybody who isn't reading the chat. So first, to start with sponsorship, I think we've talked about this. It's a little bit of an interesting process in the House. The sponsor of the bill has to go around, or their staff or an advocate, and get legislators' signature on the blueback. So if you didn't co-sponsor it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't support the bill. It may just mean that you weren't there or they didn't find you when they were walking it around. In the Senate, we send in a piece of paper that says we want to co-sponsor, but again, only if the sponsor is seeking co-sponsors. In the case of the SLAPP bill, Senator Hedelman didn't seek co-sponsors. Not everybody does. So that's why I wasn't on it. I was on a work group in judicial proceedings to try to work on this bill. It's a really, really important bill, and I agree in this national climate that Maryland needs better laws. I think, honestly, it's a technical bill, and it got behind some of the other high priority bills. So I don't think there's anything negative about it. I think we'll come back at it next year, and hopefully we can pass it next year. Let's see. Here we go. Two big disappointments from JPR. Failure of the YES Act and Good Cause. It appears that the Senate President's power over these bills forced their failure. Any idea on how we can move these bills next year? So, Good Cause, you know that I have voted for it in the House. The House sent it over again this year. There was discussion about trying to balance out a lot of the rules and restrictions that Montgomery County has on rent control and where Good Cause would fall within that. So there was a lot of discussion. The sense of leadership in the Senate was that we would pass Good Cause, but that jurisdictions had to choose between some of these restrictions, such as rent control. And a lot of the advocates were pushing back on that. So the bill stalled. I think, I'm not sure what can be done to break through that. I know that it's come over a number of times, and Delegate Wilkins and Chair Korman has done a lot on this bill to try to move it forward. I think that Chair Smith is just, he's really concerned about the balance of laws right now. We had a briefing at the beginning of session on the status of housing, and you will hear over and over again that we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough affordable housing, and I think there was a hesitation about putting another layer of restrictions on. I understand that the arguments against that, but I think there was some hesitation about putting another layer on that might dissuade landlords. So we'll see if any of that changes over the next year. Let's see what my colleagues, do you see any questions in here that I have missed that haven't been answered?
I mean, I think they've mostly been answered in the chat, but Debbie Cohn asked about incentivizing schools to be built in a greener fashion.
Yes, go for it.
So I'll start, but Delegate Wolek's committee actually deals with school construction in a pretty significant fashion. I'll just say a few years ago, I had a bill to mandate this actually and require schools be built greener. That did not pass, but instead we increased the state match for schools that are built greener. So we have a school construction program, a statewide school construction program in Maryland, one of just a few states to have a program like this. And in Montgomery County, the match is 50-50. So for every dollar Montgomery County puts in, they can get a dollar match from the state. Other jurisdictions that are not as economically well off as Montgomery County get a higher match from the state. So they might only have to put 10 cents in and get the dollar. What we did is we added bonuses saying you get basically an additional 5% if you build in a greener fashion. So we didn't mandate it, but we tried to incentivize it. And I don't know if Delegate Wolek has further thoughts given her committee's role in school construction.
Thank you for turning that over. No, I don't have much more to add. I mean, that's something that's worth exploring. I was looking at sort of the green space and schools from a green school perspective, which was much more around teaching children sustainability and getting them outdoors and including that into their educational experience. Certainly part of that is making the part of the green school program is actually making the school sustainable through actions. But what you're referring to is obviously the construction end. And I think it's a great point and worth looking at further. So I can take that away and see what we might be able to do further in that area.
Okay, I think the last one that I see that I haven't addressed is asking about an investigation into the huge increases on long-term care insurance premiums. Delegate Woorman, that is in your committee. Have anything to say on that one?
That is one of the big topics in our long-term care subcommittee. I'll get back to you on the things that we ended up doing. Unfortunately, there is a commission that is studying that and has been tasked to study it. I can get the report to you, but we found that it's lacking. But happy to and this was Alan, I believe, right? Happy to follow up with you, Mr. Zuckerberg, offline.
Great. Well, not seeing any other questions, I just want to thank everyone. And not only did I drop the ball on letting you know about the questions, but also standard opening procedures in any of these things as we recognize our fellow elected officials and other dignitaries. So my sincerest apologies. I want to recognize Jim Michaels, District 16 representative to the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. We saw Julie Yang on the school board, David Naiman from our Board of Elections. I saw Joan Kleiman, former state director to Senator Van Hollen. I saw Karen Brito, former state delegate. I saw Tazeen Ahmad, current president of the Women's Democratic Club. And did I forget anybody? colleagues? Did I miss anyone? I don't see anyone jumping in to tell me I did. So many, many thanks to everyone. If we didn't get to your question, please reach out to us. We are all here to answer your questions, to do what we can to support you. Also, just a plug, we all have newsletters. So I encourage you to sign up for all of them so you can hear what's going on that in our committees and what we're all doing. So thanks again and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Sarah, you are very efficient. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you. Thanks for bearing with us with the tech difficulties at the beginning, but
No worries. Thanks, Connor. Bye.
Thanks, Connor.
Claudia, Gretchen, do we have the chat saved fully?
If you don't mind giving me like 2 minutes, not even.
No problem.
Okay,
I'll
cool.
hang tight.
All good, Connor.
Great. I'm gonna sign off.
Okay, me too. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.